Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another 4 p.m. Bible study. My name is Jim Schaefer, and I share with you live every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Now, we've been working our way through the Old Testament looking for glimpses of Jesus. We have seen hundreds of such glimpses thus far. Today, we move to the book of Daniel. Now, Daniel is to the Old Testament what the book of Revelation is to the New Testament. It is a prophetic book that seems to focus on end time events. Now, there's a lot of additional information in the book of Daniel. And while I don't have time to go through the book of Daniel chapter by chapter, that's a study for another time, another day, another subject matter. But I will attempt to give you a bit of an overview of the book of Daniel as we do move through it. Now, if you are really interested in a study on the book of Daniel, I invite you to let me know in the chat. Also, I have placed a number of things on my Facebook page, some diagrams and different things to help you understand where we're at and what it is we're talking about. Today, we're going to be including a quiz in our study. So I encourage you to have a piece of paper to jot down some answers. You can certainly share them in the chat if you're so brave enough. I think you'll find it a bit fun. Not all the questions have definitive answers, but I would love to see your response to it. I want to welcome Jeff Pugh. He's number one in the house today. Hello, Jeff. Please say hello to Kim for me. Hello, Jackie Snyder. It is also nice to see you. Sandra Hines is here today, watching intently, listening. I appreciate that, Sandra. For all of those of you who watch after the fact, let me take a moment to welcome you to this lesson as well. I know that's the vast majority of you out there. Thanks for taking time to watch the video, to respond, to send words of encouragement. Please let me know what time it is you're watching and what day. And again, feel free to ask questions as we move forward. Now, the book of Daniel is really a very special book. It is perhaps my favorite book in the entire Old Testament. There is just so much information, including some extremely detailed prophecies concerning the first coming of Jesus Christ. And we're going to be looking at that fully next week on Tuesday. But today we're going to be looking at chapter 2 and chapter 3 in particular. And we're going to be looking at the story of the three Hebrews that are thrown into the fiery furnace. Now, my guess is the vast majority of you know this story. It's one of the stories that is shared in almost every Sunday school curriculum, and there are plenty of lessons that were out there even as a child that you perhaps heard. But there are a number of details in this story that aren't normally talked about. And we're going to be looking at some of that here today. Hello, Robin. It is nice to see you today here as well. Well, when we get to chapter 2 of Daniel, and again, remember where we're at in the timeline of history. From the time of David and Solomon, the kingdom of Israel had reached its zenith, its height. Following the death of Solomon, the kingdom is divided into two. Israel is to the north, Judah is to the south. Now, all of the kings of Israel are bad. Most of the kings of Judah are also bad. We're going to see that the kingdom of Israel, those 10 northern kingdoms, are going to be carried off into captivity by the Assyrian Empire. The southern tribes, that's two of them, Judah and Benjamin, go under the name of Judah. They will be carried into captivity by the Babylonian Empire. Now, the Babylonian Empire had come in and had defeated the Assyrians, and they were now the world power, so to speak. And it is at this point that we see that many of the Israelites, or people from Judah, are going to be carried off into captivity. Others will be killed there in Jerusalem. Others will flee to Egypt. That's where Jeremiah will end up. And as a boy, Daniel is carried off into captivity into the uh, Babylonian kingdom. And there he rises in the ranks until he becomes one of the advisors of King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream of a statue, and he provides us the details of this statue. He wants to know what it means, and interestingly enough, Daniel comes up and he announces there is a God in heaven who is able to interpret such things, and he provides Nebuchadnezzar the interpretation. Now, in this dream, and I think it's important for us to at least take a quick look at this. In chapter 2, we see this statue has a head of gold. It has arms, I'm sorry, and chest of silver. It has the belly and thigh of bronze, and it has legs of iron, and it has feet of iron and clay. So we see this great statue, and Daniel provides at least a portion of the interpretation there in chapter 2. He tells King Nebuchadnezzar, "You are that head of gold." So we know that the head of gold represents Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. He then tells us that the arms and chest of silver is going to represent the next kingdom, the kingdom that will take over for the Babylonians. It is somewhat unnamed there in chapter 2, even though as we move forward in the book of Daniel, it is going to be named. We are going to see that the Medo Persian Empire comes in and takes over. They are the arms and chest of silver. The belly and thigh of bronze will be the next kingdom that will come on the scene. And according to history, that is the Greeks. Primarily Alexander the Great. When he dies, the four kingdoms, and they are going to control all of the known world at that point in time. Finally, we have the legs of iron, and most scholars believe that that represents the Roman Empire. All right, they will conquer the Grecian Empire and will set up their own kingdom, and it is into that kingdom that Jesus will be born. So, that's kind of the flow of history. We also have in that statue of chapter 2, we have feet of iron and clay. Now, there are a number of interpretations of this. Some refer to that as the revived Roman Empire. In other words, a kingdom that perhaps is yet to come that will make up the same area as the old Roman Empire, and that is in existence today. It's primarily the what's been called the United States of Europe or the European Common Market. At any rate, some say that that represents the feet. Others just point to this world as it is right now being so unstable as being the feet of iron and clay. And so, very possibly, it includes us in this picture. And all we got to do is look at our world, and it does seem to be falling apart, doesn't it not? I think all of us are a bit surprised at what has taken place in our polls and here in Ohio in just the last few days. At any rate, we have this statue in chapter 2, and near the end of that chapter, we see a rock that is cut, but not by human hands. In other words, it's an act of God, and this rock will come and it will hit the statue and it will cause it to collapse and break into pieces, and the wind will sweep away the debris, and suddenly a mountain will grow, and we are ushered into the kingdom of God. Now, that is the picture. The rock, I think, is a glimpse of Jesus Christ. So we see that in chapter 2. This glimpse of Jesus. Jesus is coming, and he's going to overturn the kingdoms of this world, and he's going to set up his own kingdom. At least that's my interpretation of the book of Daniel, as well as many others. Now we come to chapter 3, and we see that Nebuchadnezzar has created an image of gold. Now, let me read to you from the third chapter. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. That's about 90 feet high, about 9 feet wide, and it is a huge monstrosity. At any rate, he sets it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon, and he summons the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all other provincial officials to come to the dedication of this image that he's set up. And so all of these individuals come and they stand before it. And then Nebuchadnezzar uh, has announced this: nations and people of every language, this is what you were commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Where does he get the idea for this image? From his dream. And he was told that you are the head of gold. And so he thinks, well, I'm really important. I'm the head of gold. I'll set up this image and make everybody worship. Verse 6: whoever does not fall down and worship will be immediately thrown into a blazing furnace. So we have the beginning of our story. Now, we all know the story. We know that people are going to be thrown into this fiery furnace, and there are going to be three Hebrews that are going to be tossed in. Here in chapter 3, verse 22, we have this passage. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. How did they end up there? They refused to bow down. Now we know that these three are Hebrews, just like Daniel was, that had been carried off into captivity by the Babylonians. They refused to bow down. Their belief in Jehovah God will not allow them to worship something other than Him. So Nebuchadnezzar then stands and looks into this furnace. And it says, then King Nebuchadnezzar, that was easy for me to say, leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there three men that we tied up and threw into the fire? And they replied, certainly, O king. I don't think they're going to challenge him one way or the other. And he says, look, I see four men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the fourth looks like a son of the gods. Now, I believe we have here a glimpse of Jesus. I think it is Jesus in the fire with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This is taking place somewhere in the neighborhood of 597 BC. I want to remind you that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and by the way, that wasn't their Hebrew name, that was their Babylonian names. And this is bringing us close to our first question, so stick with me here. Their actual names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They were Jews who had been carried off into captivity, into exile, like Daniel had in the 6th century BC. Now, Daniel's name, and that was his Hebrew name, Daniel's name meant Yahweh is my judge. Hananiah meant Yahweh has been gracious. Mishael means who is what God is. And Azariah means Yahweh has helped. So all three of these individuals had names that reflected their belief in God. We've talked about names throughout our studies, and we've said that names are very important in the Old Testament. They communicate something very important to us. And all four of these names are names that refer to Yahweh. Now, we know that the king and his advisors are going to rename all of them. Daniel's name is going to be changed to Belteshazzar, which means Baal, protect the king. Shadrach means the command of Aku, who was the moon god. Meshach means who is as Aku is, again, the moon god. And Abednego means slave of the god Nebu, god of writing and vegetation. Now, here's question number one. Why did the Babylonians change the names of those who had come from Israel. Why did he change the names of Daniel, of Hananiah, of Mishael, and Azariah? Go ahead and take a minute and jot down your answer, or at least have it firmly in your mind. If you want to go ahead and put it in the comments, if you're brave enough, that's perfectly fine. And remember, this is just a matter of asking these questions, not to see who's the smartest, but to stir your thinking, to help you get more involved in the story. I see that Gene Messenger has joined us. Hello, Gene. I'm glad that you're here as well. And if you got an answer, please feel free. Why did the Babylonians change the name? I've pretty much given you the answer, right? If we take a look at it, all four of the names were references to Yahweh, to the God of the Israelites. And of course, we know that the Babylonians didn't want anything to do with the God of Yahweh, so they changed the name to reflect their gods. In fact, it's interesting to me that Mishael, whose name meant who is what Yahweh is, has been changed to Meshach, which means who is as Aku is. So it's the same name, but with a reference to a different God. It is a matter of control and ownership, as Robin has pointed out. Very good, Robin. Excellent. Now, here's a question for you that isn't answered in the text, but I think it's a very interesting one. Throughout the book of Daniel, Daniel is always referred to by his Hebrew name, Daniel. In other words, we're told that Belteshazzar is his Babylonian name, but he's never called that in the book of Daniel. On the other hand, why are all of the others referred to by their Babylonian name? Why does Daniel refer to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the story? He admits that they had other names prior to that, but throughout the book of Daniel, it's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Babylonian names, but Daniel is always referred to by his Hebrew name. Why? I have an answer for you. Don't know if it's the right answer, but I'll share it with you in just a moment. Let's see, Jeff had chimed in on the first answer as well to try to give them Babylonian identity, and I think that's true. But why does Daniel refer to his three friends, so to speak, by their Babylonian names, not their Hebrew names? And why is Daniel only referred to by his Hebrew name and never, or at least seldom, by his Babylonian name? I'll give you just a second there. A little tougher question than the first one, isn't it? But what do you think? Wish I could see you all face to face and point a finger and say, "What do you think, Jeff?" Or "What do you think, Gene?" "What do you think, Robin?" Uh, or "Sandy, what do you think?" Curious. I think the first part is pretty obvious. The reason Daniel is mentioned by his Hebrew name is he's the one doing the writing, right? He's the one doing the writing, and so he is going to refer to himself by what he believes his real name is. He doesn't care what the Babylonians are thinking. But for some reason, he refers to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego by their Babylonian names. Why? Why not refer to them by their Hebrew names? Give you just a few seconds, see if anybody can come up here and give me some kind of an answer. I don't know that there is a right answer here. All I have is a guess. But what do you think? Why do you think Daniel refers to them by their Babylonian names? They're not as spiritual as he is. That doesn't seem like it would be a right answer. Jeff says, well, Daniel is God's prophet. Yeah. Robin said maybe for their protection. Could be. He's going to be sensitive to what the Babylonians think. I'm not positive Daniel cared that much about what his captors thought. he seemed to do what he wanted to do. I guess it's pretty simple. He refers to them by their Hebrew name because that's what they're being called all around him. My guess is he didn't know who these young men were when they were in Israel. They're carried off into captivity with him. And while he knows they had Hebrew names, really the names that are spoken about them all around him are the Babylonian names. And so, because that's what he heard all the time, I think that's part of why he refers to them by their Babylonian names as opposed to their Hebrew names. Well, here's question number three, and this is even more difficult. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Try it again. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are tossed into the fiery furnace. They refuse to bow down before the image. Where's Daniel? Did he bow down before the image? Not likely. So what's going on here? Why are these three singled out, but Daniel isn't? And let's understand, Daniel must have known that they did so. That's the reason he includes this story in his writings. So where is he? How come Daniel doesn't say, well, guys, the reason that I wasn't thrown into the fiery furnace was because what? What do you think might have been there? Again, I know this is just conjecture. This is just wondering, but I think it's important for us to ask these kind of questions as we study the Bible, because these are events that really happened, and we need to understand that something's going on here, even though we're not told. Was Daniel perhaps elsewhere? Was he traveling in other areas? Perhaps he is not home in Babylon when this takes place. Maybe he was sick that day. Maybe God gave him a case of the flu, so he didn't have to go out and didn't have to face this. But it is an interesting thought, isn't it? Where is Daniel in all of this? Well, that brings us to really question number four, and that is, how old would you guess that these three people were? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Well, oftentimes when we tell the story, they're the three Hebrew children. I mean, that's kind of the focus in Sunday school material. But are they really kids? Is there anything in the text that would lead us to believe that they were a specific age? Yeah, there's no doubt, Sandy, that he wasn't there that day so that he would be the one to write about it. I think that's probably true. But there had to be some reason why he's not present when the music sounds. Or maybe they just didn't see him. Maybe he was hiding behind somebody else. Maybe his stature was so small that he was able to hide and it looked like he was, I don't know. I'm just, that's a short person's take on what might be taking place. But how old were these three? What would be your guess? These three men are referred to as young men. Now, that's a term in the Hebrew that is hard to pin down. Many believe that at 13 you became a man. So with the term young man, they could have been anywhere from 13 to maybe 19 years of age. Chances are they're somewhere in that area, somewhere between 13 and 20. So let's just continue here. Robin says maybe 30s, and certainly it could be. But they're referred to as young men in the text, and exactly what that means, we're not exactly sure. Sandra says, I thought they were about 16 to 18, and that's a pretty safe guess. Uh, so, at any rate, we see that these three Hebrew boys, young men, when they are before King Nebuchadnezzar, they provide an answer why they have refused to bow down. And I want you to listen to their answer because I think it's instructive for us. They say, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter." And I'm sure Nebuchadnezzar's thinking, "Oh, yes, you do." He says, "If we were thrown into the blazing furnace, the God that we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." This is a very brave statement by these three Hebrews. Our God's able to save us, but even if he doesn't, we still won't serve you. And I think this is a great example for us. Sometimes God does save us, and sometimes he has us go through the fire. Sometimes God comes and rescues us from certain situations that we face, and other times we're expected to put our trust in him and simply move forward to the best of our ability. And whatever happens, we're going to trust God. I think that's a real important passage in this entire story. So, at any rate, they're ready to face death rather than bow down to the golden image. The king's furious, as in our subject verses that we've read above. He cast the three into this super hot furnace. Even the soldiers who cast them in perished in the flames. But looking into the furnace, the king and his men are shocked to see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego not withering and crying out and suffering, but walking around. They had been bound with ropes, and yet they are walking freely, the ropes having burnt away. And the people are shocked. The king is shocked. But not only do they see them walking around alive, but another man was with them, one who looked like a son of the gods. Now, to me, here's our glimpse of Jesus. And it tells us something that even as we go through the most difficult times in our life, Jesus will be with us. And again, that is the one thing we take away from this story that we can stand on, that God will always be there with us in the good times and in the bad. Now, we've talked about theophanies earlier, and also what we called Christophery, a Christophany, a Christophany. We'll get that word right in a minute. A physical manifestation of the pre-incarnate Christ. Here we see this Christophany, a fourth man in the fiery furnace. How do we know this to be true? How do we know that this is really God, Jesus in the fiery furnace with them? Well, first of all, the fact that our three brave and faithful young men survived the fire is a miracle. The Bible says that not a hair on their head was even singed. It goes on and it says they didn't even smell of smoke. Only God can interfere with the natural laws of his created order. They should have died. There is no reason, according to this world standard. It is a miracle. The second thing is that the figure that was walking around with them was that of a man. Well, what other man could it have been? Even the soldiers that had thrown them in died from the fire. So who could this man be who resembles one of the gods other than the God of the universe, the pre-incarnate Jesus? Thirdly, we know that it was the pre-incarnate Christ because of the effect of his appearance and miracle upon this Gentile king and all those who are present. Nebuchadnezzar says in verse 29 of chapter 3, no other God can save in this way. He knew that it was God. He knew that it was God with him. And he says, no other God can save in this way. Miracles often testify to the true work of God. We use the term too loosely today, saying even the most common of all God's extraordinary things are miracles. And I don't have a problem with that. But this is a miracle beyond doubt. This is clearly over and above what should have taken place. The fourth thing, we know that the man was Jesus because it is Jesus who saves all of us from the fiery furnace of hell. And we see in this story that picture. Now, the Bible very rarely speaks of hell. You wouldn't know that by the amount that it's preached on. The word hell only occurs 14 times in the New Testament, and 12 of those times are on the lips of Jesus. For instance, in Matthew 18:9, it says, "And if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with one eye than to have two eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell." In Mark chapter 9, verse 43, these words of Jesus are recorded. "If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than with two hands to go to hell, where the fire never goes out." Now, hell is, of course, represented by other terms. In Revelation 20, verse 14, it says, "Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire." And that lake of fire is the second death. Now, just as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were saved from Nebuchadnezzar's fire by their faith in God's deliverance, so also we who have come to Jesus Christ in faith, in his blood, shall be saved from the fire that burns forever. Now, let's go on to question number, I think it's 4, but I'm not positive. Did you know that Daniel lived at the same time as another very influential man, someone that you might associate with cookies? Any idea who that might be? Daniel's living at the same period of time in history as this other fellow, and he is associated with cookies. Who might that be? I'm going to give you a few seconds here. Who do you think it might be? And again, I ask this question not because it has any great Amos. That's good, Jeff. Amos. No, it's not Amos, but I like your thinking. It's not a biblical character. Let's make it easier. That's really good. Yay, Jeff. I mean, just to give us some perspective in history, while Daniel was serving in Babylon, this other individual is growing up in a region that today is known as Cafu. It's a city in China. That puts these two men, these two historical men, about 4,000 miles from each other during those years. And they're both going to be heralded because of their great wisdom. Jeff has finally got it. He's moved off of Amos and he's gone to Confucius and fortune cookies. Okay. Again, Confucius is living at about the same time as Daniel. So I think that's, again, uh, something that's rather interesting. Certainly, I'm not trying to compare Confucius with Daniel, but just to give us a feel of what's taking place in the world during this period of time. We need to remember that the world of the Bible is taking place everywhere. I mean, we're not talking about something that happened in another universe, it's something that happened within our world. And there were other things that were going on at the time. And that's just to give you a little example. Here comes the next question. I think we're at 5, maybe 6. Uh, what language was the book of Daniel written in? What language? This could be a very easy question or this could be a difficult question. And maybe the better answer is, or the better question is, what languages is the book of Daniel written in? We know the New Testament was written in Greek, all right? Again, the Greek Empire is going to be one that takes over from the Medo-Persians who took over from the Babylonians. No, he's not in the Bible, Robin. I said this individual wasn't in the Bible. So, no, he's not in the Bible. It's not Greek, Jackie. That was the language of the New Testament. So, what is the language of the Old Testament? Most of the Old Testament is written in what language? And again, we've talked about this before, but I think it's important for us, again, just to be reminded of some of these things. The Old Testament, by and large, was written in Hebrew. That is correct. However, the book of Daniel is different in that it also is written in an additional language, very closely aligned with Hebrew. And it's the only portion of the Old Testament that is written in this language. Robin says Aramaic, and she is correct. Right? A good portion of the book of Daniel is written in Aramaic. So, this brings up, I think, another question. Why? Why is it being written in Aramaic? Um, most of Daniel's written in Hebrew, except for most of chapter 2 and all of chapter 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. All of those passages are written in Aramaic. Now, Aramaic would have been the language of the Babylonians. So, to me, this is telling us something about Daniel's message here. Yes, he's writing for the Hebrews, because he is a Hebrew himself. But it is obvious he is also writing to the Babylonians. He wants them to be aware of what his God is doing in the world. And so he writes in the language of the people that are in charge. And so we see that Daniel becomes uh, an evangelist, so to speak. Here he is speaking the language of the people and communicating with them. Now, we'll move to the next question. Since we aren't sure the age of the three Hebrews, figuring that they're probably between 13 and 20, could be 13 to 30, how old was Daniel when he was thrown into the den of lions later in the book? Give me a guess. Now, again, we don't know certain, but when we take a look at the probable date of him being carried into captivity and the date that different kings will come to power, remember, Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. All right. He will die and his son will take over. That's when the handwriting on the wall takes place. You will see that the Medo Persians come in, and the Medo Persians will rule for a while. And then the Persians will step on the scene and take over from the Medo Persian Empire. Medo meaning the Medes and the Persians. All right. And so then we come to the Persians, and it is during the Persian control of Babylon in that area that a king will allow the people to go back to Israel to rebuild their temple. That's going to be about 70 years from the time King Nebuchadnezzar takes the Jews to Babylon to the time they go back was about 70 years. It is near the end of this period of time that Daniel finds himself thrown into a lion's den. So, assuming he's in the neighborhood of, again, 13 to 20, when he, or perhaps even a little younger, there's a good possibility that Daniel is about 80 years old when he is thrown into the lion's den. Now, that's, when you stop and think about that, that doesn't fit the picture that most of us have of Daniel. Most of the time we think of him as a young man because we're reading through it very quickly. But the truth is, there are many, 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 many years that are taking place. They will spend 70 years in captivity. So that's assuming that he's 10 years old at least when he goes to Babylon. And he's going to be 70 to 80 years old by the time he leaves or is permitted to leave by the Persian king. So there's a good possibility he's about 80 years old. I've answered the next question, and that was how long did the Babylonian exile last? 70 years. All right. So the whole book of Daniel is taking place over about a 70-year period. Here's your next question. How many kings did Daniel serve while he was in exile? Over that period of 70 years, how many kings did he serve? And we're told, and again, this is a guess on our part, there could have been others that served but aren't mentioned, within the scriptures. But we know that there was one, Nebuchadnezzar, and there's a good chance that actually Nebuchadnezzar's father was on the throne when the exile began, Nabopolassar. All right. And Nebuchadnezzar was kind of a minor king at that time and then came to power, but we're not going to count Nabopolassar. You guys are right, four, probably four. You have Nebuchadnezzar and then his son, Belshazzar. Belshazzar is the one that saw the handwriting on the wall that said his kingdom was going to be taken from him, and it was by the Medo-Persian Empire. The first king of the Medo-Persian Empire was Darius the Mede. So there's our third king. Darius the Mede is going to hold that position. And then when the Persian Empire overthrows the Medes and sets up their own king, you have a fourth king. Now, that fourth king was a Persian king. And his name was Cyrus. Cyrus, Cyrus. And he is the one that will allow the Jews to return to Judah, to Jerusalem, to begin to rebuild the temple. And that's going to be the subject of our next Bible study. We're going to be looking at chapter 9, where the prophecy is going to be given. And the prophecy is so precise that it will go from the decree of Cyrus to go back and rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah is cut off, the Messiah is killed. The number of years from that point to that point are mentioned in the book of Daniel. And it happens to the precise year and day of Jesus' crucifixion. That's what we're going to look at in our next lesson. Who in the Bible, and this is the 10th question here, what prophet is going to mention Cyrus by name even before he was alive? I mean, when you stop and you think about this, Cyrus is going to be mentioned in the pages of Scripture before he was ever in power. He is mentioned. Anybody want to take a guess? Who's he mentioned by? Which prophet mentioned Cyrus long before Daniel's day? Here's what it says. I won't tell you where it's from. But the Bible says, this is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take a hold of, to subdue nations before him, and to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him, so that the gates will not be shut. I will go before you and will level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. I will give you hidden treasures, riches stored in secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who summons you by name. For the sake of Jacob, my servant of Israel, my chosen, I summon you by name and bestow on you a title of honor, though you do not acknowledge me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Apart from me, there is no God. I will strengthen you, though you have not acknowledged me, so that from the rising of the sun to the place of its setting, people may know there is none beside me. I am the Lord, there is no other. Robin, you're right. It's Isaiah. And what I just read to you was verses 1 through 6 of Isaiah chapter 45. Think about that. Isaiah, while he's preaching to the people to repent or they're going to end up in captivity, that's what Isaiah was preaching during. He's predicting the name of the person who will release the Jews and allow them to go back home to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. Cyrus the Great, God's man for the hour, even though Cyrus did not know him, even though Cyrus never acknowledged the God of heaven, God chose him in advance for that purpose. Wow. To me, that's incredible. Well, we've seen two quick glimpses of Jesus, the rock that destroyed the statue, as well as the one who was with the three Hebrews in the fiery furnace. You will notice several things. I've compared Daniel chapter 2 and 3 to chapter 7 and chapter 8. You'll see all of those diagrams that I have placed on my Facebook page just to give you some feel for the overview of Daniel. But we'll look at chapter 9 next Tuesday. I hope you'll join us and invite somebody to be with you as well. Thank you so much for your time today. I know this was a little longer than usual, but I hope you found it beneficial. For all of you, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of our Bible study. I appreciate you. I love you, and we'll be praying for each one of you. Have a great weekend. God bless everybody.